This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to part 1.
You will hear a conversation between a bank clerk called Jeanette and a man who is asking for information on investing money. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
This is Citibank. You're speaking with Jeanette. How may I help you today?
Hi. I'd like to ask a few questions about a term deposit.
Certainly. Do you currently have any investments with us?
Yes, I do, but my term deposit is due to mature soon, and I've come to find out my options for renewing and extending it. I'm considering a range of different investments, to be honest, but I wanted to begin with the simplest option.
Okay, sir. Well, before we begin, I just need to verify your ID. Can I have your name, please?
David Marshall. That's M for mother. ARSHALL.
Thank you, David. Now, I just need to ask you a couple of security questions. What's your mobile phone number?
023-561055.
And your date of birth, please?
18th of February, 1968.
Right. So I've got your account information in front of me. You've currently got $18,000 on a term of 180 days. That's at a rate of 3.45% per year or per annum.
Okay, so what are my options? Can we start by looking at 1- and 2-year terms?
We can do that. Let's see. Right. If we put it on a 1-year term, we can offer you a yearly return of 3.65%. And for 2 years, it's 3.7%. Oh no, hang on. Sorry, we have a special deal on that term right now at 3.85%.
Okay. So what does that mean in dollars?
Just one moment and I'll bring it up. Okay, so the total interest earned would be $657 for 1 year, and I'm just bringing up the 2-year figure for you. A 2-year term at 3.85% interest, that's a total of $1,412 interest on maturity.
Right. That's about a $700 difference.
Yes, a bit more actually.
Okay. Oh, a friend of mine told me he gets his term deposit interest paid into his account every month. Do you have a monthly interest option?
Yes, actually. We do offer that on term deposits, but only on investments of $20,000 or more.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
Can I ask if you've considered a PIE as an alternative investment option?
A pie?
Yes, it stands for Personal Investment Entity. It's an investment trust. Your earnings tend to be higher than they are for a term deposit because 28% is the maximum tax on those earnings.
Okay, that sounds interesting. I've heard of those, but I've never really understood them. I thought they were called pies. They always sounded like something you eat. but I'd sure like to get a bigger slice of my investment pie.
Well, with a PIE, your investment return changes depending on how much tax you normally pay.
Oh, I see. According to my income bracket.
Yes, that's right. For example, on a 2-year plan, if you're earning in the range between $48,001 to $70,000 at 30% tax, there's a 3.75% effective rate on PIE earnings.
Okay. I'm actually on a 33% tax rate.
Well, that's an even better return. If you're earning between $70,001 and $120,000, the effective interest rate is higher too. So let's have a look for a 2-year investment. The rate actually goes up to 3.92%.
Wow. Okay. So a PIE may be the better option. Better than a term deposit, I mean. And can I do that with an $18,000 investment?
Yes, the minimum deposit for a PIE investment is $10,000.
Okay. And are there any hidden charges?
No, no fees at all for investing in a PIE.
Well, that's good news. Oh, wait a minute. What about interest payment options? Is it the same as the term deposits? You have to have a minimum deposit to be eligible for monthly payments?
Let me check the options here. Well, you'll be pleased to hear that there's actually more flexibility with PIEs than with term deposits. You can opt to have your interest paid every month, quarterly, 6-monthly, or yearly.
Okay. Well, that's given me something to think about.
Would you like to apply today?
No. I'll have to think about it, thanks.
Certainly. If you do decide to go ahead with it, applications are processed in 2 days, as long as you have a bank account with us, which you do. You can apply on our website, by phone, or pop into one of our branches.
Great. Thanks for your help.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1.
You'll hear part of a free class about safety around campus. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
Good evening. I'm Geoffrey Miller from the University of Nottingham Student Union, and in this week's free class, Carlos Garcia is going to tell us about safety around campus. Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and thank you all for your attendance today. Also, I'd like to thank the Student Union here at the university for organising this lecture. Well, I've been serving and protecting the City of Nottingham for over 20 years now as a member of the police department. Does anyone know what type of crime is the most prevalent on campus? I heard someone say drugs and alcohol. That actually isn't too much of an issue. Violence? Nope. Actually, the biggest thing we worry about here is theft. The nature of crime on Nottingham's campus is quite different from that of the surrounding areas. Crime rates across the East Midlands are very difficult to control. We'd like to see the rate stay the same for this calendar year, but it has been increasing steadily over the past 3 years. On campus, however, I'm happy to say that the overall crime rate has fallen this year. You wouldn't think so if you've seen the extremely exaggerated stories in the media. The media has done nothing but cause more concern about crime in our area. Even the crime shows you see today are a little bit far-fetched, but at least viewers know they're not real events. We'd really like to see more factual news articles out there so the public can have a rational sense of the safety level of our society.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
Okay, let's move on to what to do when you see a crime. Do not get involved if at all possible, and do not draw too much attention to yourself by running away in a conspicuous manner. Though most likely, and hopefully, you will not have to experience this situation, if you are being mugged, please do not try to resist. Instead, be compliant and seek help after the incident. Like I said, though, it is highly unlikely that you will find yourself amidst a crime, but it is important to be prepared should it ever happen. We find that educating students and staff on the correct precautions to take is the best way to increase your safety. Just remember to be smart when you're out late at night and avoid any area or person that looks suspicious. I know it sounds obvious, but I cannot stress this enough. It's also not a bad idea to have your mobile phone with you at all times, but be careful. If you're chatting on your smartphone on your way home, you're a prime target for thieves. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many people have left work or the library after 10 p.m. to go home before? A lot of you, right? If you do have to go home late at night, please don't walk home alone. More often than not, there's someone there that will be walking the same direction as you at some point. Walk home with a friend or co-worker. Even if you must use your phone to call someone that's nearby to walk with you, it's always safer to walk home with someone. So when you're walking home, you may feel more comfortable with some sort of self-defense, such as pepper spray. Now, it's your call whether you want to carry something like this or not. However, I absolutely advise against carrying a knife or any other offensive weapon. All too often, they can be used against you if you're disarmed, putting yourself in more danger. For all those interested, the Recreation Centre offers a free self-defence class to all students every Thursday evening. While obviously an introductory self-defence class may not equip you to fight off villains like a regular superhero, it does come in handy sometimes. After taking a self-defence class, you'll surely be more aware of possible dangers and how to deal with them. So hopefully now you have a more complete understanding of the nature of crimes committed on your campus and how to avoid being a victim. I know most students at the University of Nottingham are not the criminal types, but remember that there is no barrier like a wall or something keeping non-students out. There's no army force securing the borders, and I doubt anyone wants it that way. The campus is generally a safe place, but it's not immune to small crimes once in a while. All right, that's all I have to say for today. Stay safe.
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2.
You will hear two students called Helen and Jeremy, who are studying creative writing, discussing a project for their course which involves writing and illustrating stories for children. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hello, Helen. Sorry I'm late.
Hi, Jeremy, no problem. Well, we'd better work out where we are on our project, I suppose.
Yeah, I've looked at the drawings you've done for my story, The Forest, and I think they're brilliant. They really create the atmosphere I had in mind when I was writing it.
Oh, I'm glad you like them.
There are just a few suggestions I'd like to make.
Go ahead.
Now, I'm not sure about the drawing of the cave. It's got trees all around it, which is great, but the drawing's a bit too static, isn't it? I think it needs some action.
Yes, there's nothing happening. Perhaps I should add the boy, Malcolm, isn't it? He would be walking up to it.
Yes, let's have Malcolm in the drawing. And what about putting in a tiger? The one that he makes friends with a bit later. Maybe it could be sitting under a tree, washing itself.
And the tiger stops in the middle of what it's doing when it sees Malcolm walking past.
That's a good idea.
OK, I'll have a go at that.
Then there's the drawing of the crowd of men and women dancing. They're just outside the forest, and there's a lot going on.
That's right. You wanted them to be watching a carnival procession, but I thought it would be too crowded. Do you think it works like this?
Yes, I like what you've done. The only thing is, could you add Malcolm to it without changing what's already there?
What about having him sitting on the tree trunk on the right of the picture?
Yes, that would be fine.
And do you want him watching the other people?
No, he's been left out of all the fun, so I'd like him to be crying. That'll contrast nicely with the next picture where he's laughing at the clowns in the carnival.
Right, I'll do that.
And then the drawing of the people ice skating in the forest.
I wasn't too happy with that one. Because they're supposed to be skating on grass, aren't they?
That's right, and it's frozen over. At the moment, it doesn't look quite right.
I see what you mean. I'll have another go at that.
And I like the wool hats they're wearing. Maybe you could give each of them a scarf as well?
Yeah, that's easy enough. They can be streaming out behind the people to suggest they're skating really fast.
Great. Well, that's all on the drawings.
Right. So you finish writing your story, and I just need to finish illustrating it, and my story and your drawings are done.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
So the next thing is to decide what exactly we need to write about in the report that goes with the stories and how we're going to divide the work.
Right, Helen.
What do you think about including a section on how we planned the project as a whole, Jeremy? That's probably quite important.
Yeah, well, you've had most of the good ideas so far. How do you feel about drafting something? Then we can go through it together and discuss it.
OK, that seems reasonable. And I could include something on how we came up with the ideas for our two stories, couldn't I?
Well, I've started writing something about that, so why don't you do the same and we can include the two things?
Right. So what about our interpretation of the stories? Do we need to write about what we think they show, like the value of helping other people or that sort of thing?
That's going to come up later, isn't it? I think everyone in the class is going to read each other's stories and come up with their own interpretations, which we're going to discuss.
Oh, I missed that. So it isn't going to be part of the report at all?
No. But we need to write about the illustrations because they're an essential element of children's experience of reading the stories. It's probably easiest for you to write that section, as you know more about drawing than I do.
Maybe, but I find it quite hard to write about. I'd be happier if you did it.
Okay. So when do you think we can get this ready?
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3.
You will hear a lecturer discussing public parks. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 34. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 34.
Most of us are familiar with a local park. We spend time there, play there, and have some of our best memories in these places. But what is a park? Basically, it can be defined as a natural, or at least semi-natural, piece of land, planted with a variety of trees, bushes and flowers, protected and reserved for the enjoyment of all citizens. There are usually regulations about the sorts of behaviour that can take place within, and sometimes there are facilities such as children's playgrounds or fields for ball games and other sorts of activities. For this reason, if there is grass, it is kept short, and this also discourages the breeding of insect pests. A well-maintained park actually needs a lot of people to look after it, and more so if the park showcases special plants, flowers or trees, in which case it is called a botanic garden. In complete contrast, if the park is big and remote enough, it is sometimes designated as a wilderness park, to be left completely alone and untouched, protected from all development in order to allow wild species, both plant and animal, to live undisturbed. But it is the urban park, the sort of park that most people are familiar with, that I want to talk about now. These preserve natural landscapes for the pleasure of the urban population, most commonly just for passive recreation. In other words, allowing people just to observe the trees and lie in the grass, and such passive recreation is certainly needed.
Before you hear the rest of the lecture, you have some time to look at questions 35 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 35 to 40.
Continuing on the subject of parks, it might surprise you to know that once there were none. 1,000 years ago, there was no need, since there were already extensive open spaces, forests and wilderness surrounding most cities and towns, for example in Europe. These dark, dank forests were large and even dangerous, full of wild animals and with the potentially fatal result of getting lost. Hence, fairy tales evolved about witches living in these areas and the wolves and bears which could threaten young children. However, with the rapidly increasing human population, the original wilderness and natural open spaces were intruded upon. Forests were cut down as population spread, and with them, urban pollution and further deforestation. But it was only with the advent of the Industrial Revolution that people realised natural areas needed to be preserved to give the populace access to the sort of nature that was fast disappearing due to the uncontrolled development and demand for resources. The first park expressly designed for that purpose is usually considered to be Prince's Park in Liverpool. This was in 1841 on land donated to the public by a rich iron merchant. With such a generous donation, worth about £50,000, the council decided to invest £5,000 of its own money in making it look good. Consequently, they hired a landscape designer, Joseph Paxton, who designed twisting turning pathways among shade-giving trees, all based around a central lake. In many ways, it became the prototype for all later large parks, including the famous Central Park in New York. But if we were to pick the park that most people are familiar with, it would be the much smaller neighbourhood park. These can be tiny, but by being in the midst of extensive development and dense populations, they are increasingly seen as a refuge, where one can get a glimpse of true nature. Many psychologists now maintain that this glimpse is necessary, for ultimately, as a species, we have an innate affinity for nature, and the concrete urban zoo clashes with our inner being. This has seen the rejuvenation of many urban parks that were once left to decay, for example, in New York or London, and indeed some cities such as Melbourne are known all over the world for their abundance of carefully maintained parks, including a world-famous botanic garden.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test.